been a lot of talk recently in America about Duhmocracy. The problem of this being that America is not a democracy. America is a constitutional republic. Well, what's the difference? The difference is, in a democracy, it's mob rule. The majority decides the rules for everyone. And if the majority decides that you have no rights, and the legislature or whatever system of governance you have set up in your democracy forms up legislation and statutes, clauses, well then that's the rule. But that's not what America is. America is a constitutional republic, meaning that we have a constitution, and this constitution enumerates our rights, outlines our rights that are endowed to us not by the government, not by the legislature or the judiciary or the executive, but by our Creator. It outlines these rights that are inalienable. What's the definition of inalienable? Inalienable means that it cannot be sold, transferred, taken, or given away. These things are important. Now, the legislature and the judiciary and the executive, they do have the power to create laws and to manage and run the nation. And the people do get a say. However, these certain things, the things that are enumerated under our Constitution, are out of bounds, if you will. Meaning that people could vote on it and the mob could decide that only certain people have the Second Amendment. And other people, we've decided, don't get to have the right to bear arms or the right to free speech. And that's just not the way our country is set up. Now, some people may not like that. I get that. Move to a country where that's not the case. The thing of it is, there is Supreme Court decisions going back and things written in our founding documents that say, although the legislature may decide one day to write up statutes and laws that completely go against the founding articles, the founding documents, the people ought not to follow those. Actually, I think the wording is, anything that is repugnant to the founding documents, not only are the people right not to follow them, but it is their duty. Because the Constitution doesn't limit the freedom of the people. Our Constitution and the things it enumerates does not limit the people, nor does it outline all of our rights which have been endowed by our Creator. Really, it limits the power of the government. Now, this doesn't mean that anything not enumerated in the Constitution is automatically under the power of the government. It actually means the opposite. It means that anything not outlined in the Constitution should just be assumed to be a right of the people. Now, the Second Amendment doesn't say shall not be infringed pending a background check. It doesn't say shall not be infringed pending the mob's agreement. No. It's written in very plain English. In recent years, there has been outcries that the Constitution is outdated, that we should get rid of that. It doesn't apply anymore. We live in a digital age now, and the Constitution doesn't mention anything about digital freedom. But that's just simply not true. Now, there's people who would like to use fancy words and mental masturbatory gymnastics to try and say that it doesn't apply to these things. But the right to privacy, does that mean you only have the right to privacy in a physical sense? Well, it does mean you have the right to privacy in a physical sense, but I would venture to say that digital privacy is also privacy. It says we have the right to not be unreasonably searches and seizures. The right to be protected from unreasonable search and seizure. Does that mean you only have the right to be protected from unreasonable searches and seizures in a physical sense? Now, I would think that that would include a digital sense. But there are those who would try to use fancy words and say, well, it doesn't say that specifically, so that's not the case. And again, I go back to any rights not specifically outlined in our Constitution, founding documents, Declaration of Independence, ought to be assumed to be rights of the people, thereby limiting the power of the government. These things are important. These things are the things that our flag is supposed to represent. And these things are more important than the fabric and the colors on that flag. They should be held near and dear by the citizens of the nation. And the government, the representatives, are supposed to be made up of those citizens. So those people should also be holding these things near and dear and cherishing them. Not just for the people they claim to represent, but for themselves, for their children, for their grandchildren, for the future generations. Now, men have gone and shed their lifeblood for us to have these freedoms today, for us to not live under tyranny. Now, maybe it's just because I grew up around military bases and was reminded constantly by statues, by the people that you see in the world around you, and just by being near and on a military base. Maybe it's just that I was so close to these things that it just was really ingrained in me. But I think it should be ingrained in everyone. If you don't cherish these things, just go try living in a country where you don't have them. You will find very quickly how important these things are. And I would bet that you would no longer take them for granted. And you'd be begging to come back to America, the land of the free, the home of the brave. These are very important conversations that everyone ought to be having. And I go around in this world and I don't hear anyone having them. I go to dinner at people's houses and if I even bring it up, they get a little upset about it. And I just say, well, that's downright un-American. There's people who say that, well, digital space is a town square, and so these places ought to be protected like the town square, and your freedom of speech there. I mean, Section 230, right? The protection of these platforms because they're the town square, and people have the right to say what they want in the town square. And this was brought before the courts, and the platforms argued that they're not publishers, they're platforms. Now, a publisher chooses what gets published. And they're not choosing that, they're just allowing people to post and say what they will. But in more recent years, they have become publishers. They choose which content is visible and which content is not. They say things like, freedom of speech, not freedom of reach. Now, I would say that's a publisher. And I would say that these companies, using their power and platform to censor people like me and many, many other people, would be like the New York Times. And I write an article and send it into the New York Times. And the New York Times says, we don't very much like the things you're writing there, sir. And so we're not going to publish it because we don't want to give you a platform. We don't want to give you a bigger audience for these things to be heard by. Because you're a publisher. Anyone who says, you ought not say those things because I find them a little offensive. This person's feelings are hurt by them. Well, you might just, someone might take the words you say and choose to misinterpret them and go do some terrible thing. So we're not going to allow you to say that thing. I would say what you're doing is infringing on freedom of speech and begging for a king. We are supposed to be self-governing. And this government has grown so big and out of control that I don't think that people are self-governing anymore. They tell you what you can and can't say. They tell you what you're allowed and not allowed to do with your private property. I think things have gotten very far from what our founders and framers intended. And if one were to simply go back and read these documents, you would see it very clearly. I think everyone should go back and read these documents and become enlightened by the things, the morals and ideals, the principles enumerated therein. You know, Europe has a king. How's that going for them lately? I see videos nearly every day of people in Europe who are being beaten, robbed, murdered, raped, and because they are subjects of the king and have no rights, they don't have a right to self-defense. They don't have a right to be armed to defend themselves, their family, and their property. And because of this, it just continues seemingly to get worse and worse. I seen a video the other day of a couple young girls, teenage girls, walking through the park with blades and hatchets, as if we're living in the Middle Ages. And their government, their king, has allowed foreign invaders with no moral fiber to come into their nation and basically to rape, rob, and pillage. This further shows the importance of liberty, the importance of our Constitution. People need to wake up. This is just becoming out of control, y'all. This book here, with our founding documents, is sold at $5 Below for just a couple dollars. You can go pick one up yourself and read it. And I'd suggest that every American does. Not because $5 Below pays me to say that, they don't. But this is important. And we need to start getting back to this. Otherwise, we ain't gonna have a country for much longer. That's all. Thank you for watching.